Good evening and welcome. I am the Richard Lyman Bushman Professor of Mormon Studies, and it's my privilege to welcome you tonight and to thank a couple of people first off, especially the J. Reuben Clark Law Society, who has partnered with us in this event and has made this lovely facility available to us. So a special thanks to them and to others who made it possible, too numerous to mention. This event is sponsored through the generous, thank you. This event is sponsored through the generous and far-sighted support of the Religious Studies Department Mormon Studies Program and the Forum on Religion and Democracy. We are very grateful to our donors for their contributions, as well as for you in joining us tonight. I'm delighted that Dr. Katrina Lantos-Sweat is here tonight. She is our speaker tomorrow. She's our 2017 Joseph Smith Lecture, and she'll be speaking on keeping religion free in an age of radicalism. I'm also happy to welcome her husband, Dick Sweat, former congressman and ambassador, and I hope that they will join in the questions afterwards. It's a delight to have you. So before I introduce this wonderful panel of bright minds and good hearts, permit me to take a moment to tell you what we're up to. At least for the first two-thirds of our program, you, with your questions, will decide the final third. So let me just say the purpose of the Joseph Smith Lecture Series is to foster public reflection on religious freedom and disestablishment as they operate in tandem in a morally diverse democratic society. Tonight, our panelists representing the United States government, two religious institutions, and the Academy will not give formal presentations. I've asked them to limit their more formal remarks to about 5 minutes to just tell you what they do. Rather, they will discuss in conversational style a massive cooperative effort by governmental and religious organizations to support and sustain refugee aid and resettlement. They will consider the religious, political, ethical, and legal dynamics of the religion-state partnership. Simply put, we will be asking them to explain to us what they do, why they do it, and what are the synergies and tensions, dogmatic and constitutional, that shape their refugee aid relationships. Given our time limit of an hour, we cannot comprehensively address these questions. We will do the best we can, and again, rely on you to draw us into your interest in the last half hour. So now that I've talked about them, permit me to introduce them to you. Barbara, can you come forward? She's asked me to call her Barbara, though she's very famous in certain circles. Very important person. I wanted to call her Chief Day, but she resisted that. So Barbara, please have a seat and let me tell them a little bit about you. First of all, she is indeed Section Chief for Domestic Resettlement within the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration of the U.S. State Department. For the last 7, and I think I can say turbulent years, Barbara has overseen the government's program for receiving and placing refugees within the United States, as well as efforts to orient them culturally. Before joining the State Department, Barbara spent 13 years directing refugee resettlement for Lutheran Social Services in South Dakota, and ultimately was appointed General Vice President for their National Office of Resettlement for the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. Much more could be said, since she has dedicated her entire career at both a very local and international level to the care of refugees. Thus, she knows all civil and religious, state, national, and international sides of our question. But she speaks tonight from the federal perspective, responsible for managing the nation's cooperative agreements with several large religious organizations, 7 to be exact, right?
6 religious, 3 non.
6 religious, 3 non-religious organizations, 2 of which have represented on tonight's panel. So now let me bring them to the table. So with President Kahn and Sister Eubank, please come forward and take their seats. Sister Sharon Eubank is the director of LDS Charities, the Humanitarian Services Division of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In addition to the program we will be discussing tonight, the church has nearly 500 projects in 54 countries, providing immediate relief in the form of food, water, clothing, and shelter, and long-term aid in the form of such things as clean water access, medication, and medical equipment and schooling. I know that she will be going into more detail. But in the last 30 years of its operation, the LDS Charities has expended $1.2 billion and innumerable volunteers in welfare, disaster, and humanitarian aid. Sister Eubank, like Chief Day, Barbara, has experience serving on the local and in faraway places. In Finland as a missionary, and Japan as a teacher of English, establishing employment offices in Africa and in Europe, and directing humanitarian work in the Middle East and North Africa. Recently, Sister Eubanks was appointed to an ecclesiastical position within the LDS Church as a member of the General Relief Society presidency. And as such, with 6 to 7 million members, is that?
7.1.
Who are tasked with a program called, what's the program called?
I Was a Stranger.
I Was a Stranger, that cooperates and is given, I think, about 1,000 hours of service in the local Charlottesville community in refugee services. And many of that community are here tonight, and I welcome you especially. So, consequently, she brings a particularly rich perspective to thinking about religion in cooperation with the state. Mr. Anwar Khan is president of Islamic Relief USA. He, too, has more than 20 years of experience working in humanitarian and development assistance. This has given him extensive field experience in such areas of conflict and disaster as Bosnia-Herzegovina, Chechnya, Gaza, Darfur, Haiti, Pakistan, and Syria. It's hard, as you think of those names, think of the chaos that President Khan and also these other two members of our panel immerse themselves in. But President Khan has done development work personally in Africa and South Asia as well. In 1994, he moved to the United States from the UK and from the Islamic Relief Worldwide organization to oversee the expansion of Islamic relief in the United States. Through an extensive volunteer network, Islamic Relief USA helps more than 100,000 people in the United States. It has a history of responding to American crises of a variety of kinds, from the Oklahoma City bombing to Flint, Michigan's need for clean water. Mr. Khan himself is a valued advisor and partner in several governmental initiatives, such as those sponsored by the U.S. Agency for International Development, the State Department's Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group, and not least, our focus tonight, the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. I'm very grateful he's agreed to join us, taking himself out of an annual meeting of his organization. So thank you for coming. So now, to encourage us to think a little more deeply and broadly, which some people think is abstractly, but we in the Academy like to think it has its own value to contribute, about especially the legal and ethical issues inherent in our topic, I've asked my friend and fellow academic to join us. Professor Kessler, please complete the panel. Professor Michael Kessler is Managing Director of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University, a pretty weighty title, Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Notwithstanding his administrative duties, Professor Kessler has maintained an active teaching and scholarly life as a member of the faculty of Georgetown's Department of Government and its Law Center. His most recent work is entitled Political Theology for a Plural Age, and his edition of the Oxford Handbook of Political Theology is forthcoming. He received his doctorate from the University of Chicago in moral and political theory and his law degree from Georgetown. I am grateful to Professor Kessler for bringing his training in law, theology, ethics, and politics to bear on our subject tonight. Given the limited time to all our panelists, I have assured him that we are as interested in his questions as his answers. So now I need to stop using so much of the time and turn the time over to the panel. I'm going to lurk here periodically and prompt them with a question. I don't want to get in the way of the conversation. At least three of these people have a long relationship together, and I think they know where they want to take us and move in concert together. Michael and I go back to graduate days, so we'll try to elbow our way into the conversation as appropriate. I have a few questions for Michael, too. So let us begin. Barbara, let me set you up by asking you, and also Susan and Anwar, to describe for you, Barbara, especially, what is the relationship between church or mosque, synagogue, temple, church, all of this state? We can no longer say church and state, can we?
You can.
We can, well, it excludes too many people to say church.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Right, so there's much diversity here. It's part of that diversity that we want to talk about. So would you just begin by describing the governmental dimension of this program that involves religion in the activities and accomplishing the public policy of the state?
Okay. So I'm kind of blending a couple questions together here.
That's right. Feel free to go where you want to go.
Okay, so first of all, let me just outline a little bit about what the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration is or does, so that you have a kind of concept of how it fits into the State Department. The Bureau, PRM, is responsible for formulating U.S. policy on population-related issues, that's the population part, providing protection and assistance to refugees, stateless persons, conflict victims, vulnerable migrants, promoting orderly and humane international migration, and managing the U.S. refugee admissions and assistance programs. So it's a functional bureau as opposed to a regional bureau. Wherever in the world one of these topics is happening, we are involved. So we are very functional and not geographic. The mission of PRM is to provide protection, ease suffering, and resolve the plight of persecuted and uprooted people around the world on behalf of the American people by providing life-sustaining assistance, working through multilateral systems, and ensuring that the best practices in humanitarian response and principles are thoroughly integrated into foreign and national security policies. So that's kind of a big umbrella overview. We work with the international community to develop humane and what are termed durable solutions for the populations that I just mentioned, and those three durable solutions are repatriation, the hope that displaced people and refugees can go home, local integration, that they will be able to remain in the country to which they have fled, which is protecting them, or resettlement. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So that's the big context. In terms of church, want me to go there next?
Well, I would like to talk about how, just a little bit of the mechanics of how churches relate to your bureau.
Well,
Do they just call you and say, hey, we have a pound of potatoes we'd like to give you? Or what
sometimes actually yes, and then I try to link them with a local office like this one in Charlottesville. But on the bigger picture, we contract, and since we're talking about refugee resettlement, we contract with currently 9 national resettlement organizations that are responsible for providing the initial services to refugees upon arrival in the U.S. And 6 of those are faith-based. 3 of them are not faith-based, but they all work with faith-based congregations and individuals in the delivery of service. I think I can fairly safely say that. And so truly, when someone calls, and especially recently when people have been so concerned about the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, we received a lot of phone calls directly from individuals, pastors, churches, church leaders who wanted to help, offering everything from sofas and places to sleep and houses and money and all kinds of goods. Some wanting to help in a structural way, and some wanting to help in a personal way. We always try to find then the best way to link what is being offered with what is being needed at the time. That's a very generalized question.
So let me ask you, before we turn to Sharon and Emma, what would it look like if you didn't have religious aid in this government program?
Well, let me tell you this. So the story goes that when Saigon fell, a little history, right? When Saigon fell, and suddenly we were faced as a country with hundreds and thousands of Vietnamese refugees needing someplace, the administration literally telephoned humanitarian and church-related organizations and said, can you help? And I know of one organization, because I used to work there, where the president then of this smallish Lutheran, happened to be at the time, organization literally got on the phone and started calling churches all around the country and asking, can you take a Vietnamese family? And this happened throughout the country and throughout the organizations who were tapped at that moment of need to reach deeply into local communities. Can you help take a family or a person into your home, into your church, and give them a new start? That worked for a while, but it's not a way to run a program. And so, in 1980, Congress, in its wisdom, established the Refugee Act, and that is the beginning of our modern day resettlement program for refugees. Prior to that, it was kind of one at a time, post-World War II, the Latvians are coming, is there a Latvian community here? And can the Latvians help the Latvians? Or, things like that. And people took care of their own, or people from their national group or ethnic group. But after the war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia and the great need and the worldwide ongoing need, it was determined that we needed a real established program. And then we have the Office of Refugee Resettlement and then the State Department taking on the role of the lead agency in refugee policy.
Thank you. So 2 issues I just want to highlight. One is it was informal and now it is a formal part of the State Department.
Yes,
to organize religious aid or to aid to the State Department initiatives.
Yes.
And secondly, we'll get to this after we talk to Sharon and Anwar. Why aren't my tax dollars enough? Okay, so hold that. We're going to get back to it in a minute, okay? So, Sharon, would you tell us what you do and maybe start us talking about why you do it? We'll do that more in detail later on.
Well, you said very nicely that we are the relief and development agency that is sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're about 32 years old, and we are funded mostly by small donations that people give. Interestingly, I think most of our money comes in under $50. 80% of our money comes in under $50, which I just love that statistic. We do emergency response, and I got to tell you, in the last 2 weeks, we're just up, our hair's still on fire. But as the 19 years that I have worked at LDS Charities, we have never had these catastrophic events yet in such a short amount of time. But aside from the emergency response, which was what we started off doing and we've done the longest, we have 6 signature programs, and one of those programs is refugee response. And we enter the refugee sphere on 3 kind of separate places. In the middle of the emergency, when people are being targeted and driven, we try to go in and work with the government on the ground in whatever situation that is to provide immediate relief to that ongoing crisis as it unfolds. The second place that we tried to create a niche for service is in, we call them forgotten camps, but there are a lot of places around the world where people have been in refugee situations for 20, 30, 40 years, and they're not on anybody's radar. They're not showing up in the New York Times, and their infrastructure is falling apart, and there are no medical facilities, and nobody's worried about kids in school. And so those are the aspects we try and work on, those places that maybe are off the beaten track where they can really use some support. And the third area is in helping the 1% of refugees who actually get resettled. And in the United States, that looks like partnering with Barbara Day and her organization and the 9 refugee resettlement agencies. So we partner with them. I can talk about it later, but we did an exhaustive 2-year study on should we become a refugee resettlement agency. And we thought, no, that's not really our strength. Let's go with our strengths. And our strengths really are, we try to fill in the gaps what those agencies need. So, for example, last year and this year, we have provided a mix of food commodities out of our Bishop storehouses, clothing out of our 42 Deseret Industries thrift stores, furniture that's made by a place called Deseret Manufacturing, which actually employs refugees, teaching them vocational skills, because you have to provide brand new mattresses. That's one of the things. And they're hard to get.
We don't require that, but in this era of bed bugs, most localities require that. Yeah.
So because that's one of the harder things to find, we use that manufacturing to provide the 9 agencies the beds that they request. We also provide a mix of cash And then we try to fill in gaps of things that they aren't able to always do. And in certain municipalities and certain locations around the United States, that looks like vocational training, English language training, legal aid, some of those kinds of things. And then I would add, as of last year, my predecessors in the Relief Society started a social awareness campaign with all of the women in the church. So this would be 7 million women around the globe, asking them to take the scripture that is in Leviticus that says, "Let the stranger that is among you be as one born among you." And most faith groups will resonate to that. And asking them to look around and in the periphery where you are, who's not interacting and for whatever reason, and see if we can't open up the channels in our society to bring those people into the circle. And I gotta tell you, without anything, I have no credit for this, but to see what those women at the grassroots level have done has just been really inspiring to me. And I happen to know some of the great work that has been done here in Charlottesville with International Rescue Committee. So anyway, I'm just proud of that. And I'm thrilled to sit at this table, although Michael and I are new to each other. But Barbara and Anwar and I, we know each other pretty well, and we bump into each other a lot around the world in different places. And so this isn't just optics, we're here talking about interfaith cooperation. We really trust each other, and we really like each other. And I couldn't be more privileged to sit at a table like this and talk about the work that we do. So thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Did you want to show a clip?
Oh yeah. I have this little 2.5-minute clip. And I brought it because I told you what we've done in the past, and we're good at giving stuff and providing volunteers. That's our specialty. But we are trying to become good at something different. And that something different is actually maintaining a longer-term relationship with the people who come in. So you can see that I was a stranger as part of this. And I thought I would show this little example. It's 2.5 minutes long, and it comes from Michigan. But it was just filmed 3 or 4 months ago. I thought I'd share it.
At the time of the Paris bombings, I became quite upset about the amount of hate and vitriol that was being spread, often by people who were ignorant of others who were different, and thought that somebody has to do something.
We got together and had the first meeting in December. We had 5 Muslims, 5 Mormons, and 5 Methodist women. We met here at my house. We decided to do some cookie baking and to have a religious discussion, and we were all, I think, surprised at how drawn we felt to one another.
It was actually really energizing, refreshing, exciting to see the similarities that we had, the openness, and the willingness to really learn more about each other's faiths.
When I came into the room, we were all being very polite and very formal. And as the evening rolled on and we started making connections, oh, you have a boy in high school, so do I. Maybe they know each other, and you start realizing how much you have in common. That we were just a bunch of moms wanting to raise their kids.
The Just Serve website is the main source of the community outreach for Tapestry in the Minneapolis area. There were so many women in this good community who wanted to participate that we would go to the Methodist Church and do a service project one month, and then the next month we would be at the Lutheran Church, and then the Catholics and the Muslims helped us with the Homeless Youth Food Drive, and so we drew our youth in as well to teach them about service.
Seeing kids walking down the street talking, all the different faith communities, but they're all just kids, and they knew that they were serving a purpose together. Just seeing that interfaith interaction made me super happy.
It was a really cool experience. That was my first time going inside of a mosque, and we had to take off our shoes. And it was really cool. I saw one of my friends from school there, and I didn't know that I'd see her there. And we're like, oh, hi, how are you doing?
I loved that. The kids walked in and they could realize I'm hearing Arabic. This is not scary, and then they get to share that with other people, that it's not anything to be afraid of.
The message I feel like is coming out in the church right now, especially in Women's Conference, that we all have been refugees at some point. When my husband and I were newlyweds, we had no money, we had no furniture. And I'll never forget the first families who invited us over for dinner, the family who gave us a couch. And so if I see somebody who is in that situation, I know what it feels like. We're all children of God. We are all brothers and sisters.
That's it.
The ninth.
I share that because, as I said, particularly when we're talking about the United States, this is a country that is built on immigration and refugees. All of us have come at different times. And as much as those newer immigrants may be learning and receiving things and participating in a social network, and getting to know other people in their community, it is just as vital for those older families to learn social justice and empathy and people understanding who are different. And so that exchange to us is the absolute reason why we're involved in this kind of work. It isn't about hygiene kits, it isn't about clothing or beds or anything else. It's about that human exchange. And for us, that's the essence of our religion. And it doesn't matter what creed somebody belongs to, it's that human exchange that makes us all brothers and sisters. Now, I've bled over into your thing about why we do it, but to me, I just had to share a little bit about that.
I'm not sure you can ever really separate those two questions, so thank you. Anwar, would you please talk a little bit about Islamic Relief USA, so we can get our bearings.
Islamic Relief USA, sorry, I just came back from the Hajj, and whenever you come back, everyone comes back with a gift of a cough. So it's not infectious anymore. That's what my doctor told me, but it's just a medication. So it should be fine. I wanted to make sure I was okay before I came. So the doctor said you can't get on the plane this week, but you can next week. Next week, inshallah, I'm off to Myanmar to build a Rohingya, and then in Bangladesh. My own story with Islamic Relief started when I was 18 in England, and Islamic Relief started at the University of Birmingham by the Islamic Society. How many of you remember Bob Geldof? Band-Aid, and then there was an American restaurant, so I can't remember. Feed the World? 1984 was the time when you saw horrific pictures of African children next to vultures, literally. The man that took that picture later committed suicide. He couldn't live with himself. And it mobilized people to do something. And the Muslim community in Britain was part of that mobilization. So we started by students at the University of Birmingham, which is my alma mater. So I graduated from there, and I came to America thinking, I can help me and my friend. You see, this is what arrogant 22-year-olds think they can do. They think they can change the world. So I'm 22 and I gave myself 3 months to start a family. And after 3 months, I thought it might take a little bit longer, 6 months. Then after 6 months, I thought it might take a little bit longer, 3 years. Then after 3 years, I had to call my mother, Mama, I ain't coming back. I'm going to be here, and then she got her ring, and I married over here. And at that point, she knew I wasn't coming back. That was a few years later. My wife was born in Cook County Hospital, Chicago. And she's father Iranian, mother's Pakistani, born in Chicago. Kids are born in Los Angeles, they're third generation, Me, when I came here, I found that there was an energy in America. That when I was in Britain, I was told what I can't do. When I was in America, no one told me I couldn't do anything. Now in England, they told me that they helped me a lot, and they did. In America, if you do well, you get an applause. Where I grew up in a conservative part of England is if you do well, you were being silly, you didn't know. You were taking a risk. They didn't understand the idea of vision and changing the world. And when I came here, it was mostly 16-year-old Muslim girls that supported us. Then it was their mothers, and then it was their brothers, and then a few years later, it was their fathers. We started by initially helping in the famine in Africa. We then now work in about 40 countries around the world, and Islamic Relief USA is one of the main contributors of the Islamic Relief family. So we try to leverage our money to then funnel it through the family to get money from the United Nations, European Union, from the Swedish government, British government, and several other governments. And recently now, US government, USAID, are supporting one of our projects in Central African Republic. And this is where things have changed. I thought that when I started, we were here to help Muslims. This was in the 80s. I was only 13 at the time, so I was a little volunteer when I was 18, but what I found was that we started helping Muslims. Then we saw the catastrophe in Boston. There was two ways for me to go. One was for me to go and try through Islamic Relief to help relief and development, and the other way was to do military action and become a radical. Because of the guidance I had, because I was brought up in mosque that taught me about mercy, love, and compassion, I took the first route. Others that I grew up with took the second route. This is important because it's not just, as Sharon mentioned, about giving a hygiene pack. I want to keep these young men and women busy doing something good so they don't go and do something bad. I want to show them that even though there's racism and there's prejudice, there's people of love. People threatened to burn our office down after Oklahoma City, and they were threatened, they came up to burn us alive. We got 40 death threats on 9/11. We have so many death threats. We have folders of death threats in our office in Alexandria. 2 offices of Islamic Relief in the world do not have their name on them. One is in Idlib, Syria. The second is in Alexandria, Virginia. Those are the only 2 offices in 40 countries that don't have their name on them. How do we fight this fear? With love. And I really wanted to mention that our oldest partnership is with the Church of Latter-day Saints charities. We have been working with them longer than we have been working with Muslim organizations. We regard them as our brothers and sisters. And in the last few years, we have worked more. We have doubled down, tripled down with our Christian friends, our Jewish friends, and our secular friends. We are not one of the 9 voluntary agencies that PRM supports, but we do support, and we got shout out to IRC, we love you. So we financially supported them here. And then I remember being in Greece when we did a program with IRC, and they didn't have enough Arabic and Farsi speaking, Pashto speaking volunteers. We brought them from America. So we've worked with IRC overseas, we've helped them over here, and we love their boss. He was a big friend, Mr. Miliband of Islamic Relief Worldwide as well. So again, we like them. We've worked with HIAS, and our friends from Church of Latter-day Saints have been financially supporting many of those voluntary agencies. And by the way, PRM is one of the best parts of the government you've never heard of. Probably because they're called PRM. I'm sorry. Probably because they have acronyms, not normally good, 3-letter acronyms. They do amazing work. Now, the State Department has supported UN and other aid agencies, and through the money that they have given them, we've been able to get that money in Jordan and in other places. We were able to spend over 100 million sterling, about $125 million in the first few years after the Syrian crisis in that area. Here in America, we actually partner with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You'd never expect us working with them. But we work with U.S. Department of Agriculture. They do God's work because they feed people. So we work with them in tribal government in Oklahoma, and we work with them with Christian and Jewish organizations on summer feeding programs. What we try to do with the refugee work that we do, and my time's run out, what we try to do with the refugee work is the voluntary agencies work with PR for a certain time period. After that, we try to step in. And it's not enough. The government, people think they pay too much taxes, and they don't realize that their taxes are funding PRM, funding USAID, and all of that. We keep on wanting to pay less taxes, but we think we're going to help more people. We think 30% of our money goes to international aid. It's 1%. It's only 1%. So we think we're a lot more generous than we actually are. So PRM does what it can, the voluntary agencies do, wonderful work of the Church of Latter-day Saints to support those 9, and we've tried a little bit, not as much as you, but what we've tried to do is mobilize mosques. More, because how many of you know more than 50% of the refugees that come to America are Muslim? More than 50% of refugees in the world come to the UNHCR are Muslim. They are from conflict zones. We have the largest migration, people on the move, 65 million since World War II. And we have the largest famine since World War II. It's a perfect storm for disease and for death. South Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, and northeastern Nigeria account for most of that famine. So we're busy trying to fight the famine there so people don't become refugees. We'd rather them not even be IDPs, but we help the IDPs over there. Our focus is over there. But if they do come here, we're trying to mobilize to complement the work of the Volans. Now, we were thinking of trying to join the Volans, but then the election happened last year. So we thought it probably wasn't a good idea. So right now, unfortunately, our main concern is that the number of refugees that the PRM is able to help and the Volans are able to help is about half. And we are really, really worried. So we want more money for PRM, we want more money for the voluntary agencies, because the more money they get, then the less we have to do. But we regard ourselves as after they've done what they're doing, then we want to help. And we believe it is important that there are mosques, there are synagogues, and there are others as helping. Money is not enough. And I remember when I was in Lesbos, this person came up to me and said, we're so happy that we see Islamic relief here. We're happy that people from other faiths are here, but we want to see that the Muslims are also helping. And we are very thankful that we have that freedom in America, and we do not take it for granted.
Thank you. At risk of not holding up some of the many more important things that you said, and I appreciate your calling us to account and informing us about some of those issues. Let me ask you, as a way of getting Michael set up a little bit. Let me pick up that part about the difficult situation that Muslims are in this country in terms of public actions, and that Mormons have been in and periodically are again. You both represent what we would call in the Academy marginalized faith communities, meaning they tend to be, people don't even want to see them, much less hear them. They're on the margins the way most Americans want to think about religion. So what does it mean to you to be engaged in a formal way with both domestic and international American governmental agencies? What does that mean to you? Besides, of course, the opportunity it gives you to exercise your faith commitments that Sharon and you have both described so well. What is the social significance?
We're involved mostly with other faith-based organizations.
I'm sorry, so I think you need to face forward.
We're involved mostly with other faith-based organizations. With the government, what we're doing is limited. And that's not just us, that's generally Muslim organizations. We came after everyone else. We're still coming. We're trying to work with the government, and I know that there is within the Muslim community questions, should you work with the government or not? We have definitely said we do. And our British offices and our European offices are much more engaged than we are. We are involved in some programs over here, and as I said, we wanted to work more. We spoke to the voluntary agencies, and they want Muslim representation on it. PRM was very nice towards us, and we love and by the way, big supporter, and we love the work they were doing. However, there's tension right now. There's a feeling within the Muslim community that we have of persecution and of more fear than we've ever had. And I'm seeing even more than 9/11. Some people come to me and they are really, really scared. And they are worried about doing anything with the government. And we've seen what's happened with Dhaka now. People aren't sure if I give my name to the government, will I still be safe? So we regard ourselves as one of the uncool kids. Like our Mormon friends were in the last century, and we think they're cooler now, but still. So what I thought was hilarious was part of the reason I think our partnership was we both know what it's like to be marginalized. And we both have a confidence that our government can do better. And I'm not here to attack the government. I'm here to say that we need to work more with the government, and the government is for everyone, and that includes Muslims as much as it does anyone.
The interesting thing about being marginalized is that the Catholics also are a marginal religious group, but they've been the dominant demographic religious group since about 1840, 1850. So this feeling about religion, I'm going to get Michael there, this feeling about religion and the sense of danger around it, danger around particular kinds of religion, as it relates to our constitutional values and disestablishment. I want to know what you've heard as you've listened to this panel, both in terms of the government scruples about being engaged with religion, but what Honor Khan has said about his own people's concern, what it means to them. In other words, this is risky for both sides. Right? So as an ethicist, as a political scientist, as a lawyer, what are the issues you would point out to us to start thinking about?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and now I have a better sense of why you did. And there was a lot of
and I owe you.
Because these are esteemed leaders of organizations and institutions that do tangibly good work, and in the academy, in some ways, you play the long game. I actually have a couple of students wandering these halls in this who will hopefully go off and do something, but I was one minor player in their larger work. As the role of an academic in some ways is to step back and take these assessments. But so I would focus on two things that based on what's been said. The first is to this constitutional question. And sorry, I have a 15-month-old vector of disease, and I got not from the lodge, but just her going to a play group and getting really cold. So apologies for that. The constitutional question, I think, there is a somewhat tenuous solution that has been reached in the last 30 or 40 years in terms of funding, especially in the foreign context. The big case in this regard was actually a domestic case, Lemon v. Kurtzman, but there was a three-pronged test that the court applied there about a government aid program. And it was, does the government aid program to religion have a secular purpose? And does its primary or principal purpose have to neither advance nor inhibit religion? And then does the program have any excessive entanglement? And the government programs largely, and I'm sure Barbara will, because my colleague and friend is Sean Casey, who ran the Office of Religion and Global Affairs under Secretary Kerry, and I had long conversations with him as I was writing a paper about this exact issue. The State Department lawyers are really good at applying the Lemon test to everything, and it was always striking me as somewhat odd because the Lemon test is, as I said, in a domestic context, and in the foreign affairs context, the power of the president, the power of the executive branch, is in some ways at its zenith when engaging in foreign affairs. The courts and the Congress doesn't have a lot of powers when it comes to foreign affairs. Very limited band across things. And then, although one of the things it does have power is to set rules for naturalization and largely for immigration. So that's one interesting oversight function. But there's a kind of general consensus that in the foreign context, the government has to be careful, but the president has more authority in setting foreign policy and working with, and there was one case that even said, you can't do this thing. The State Department can't do this thing, fund religious schools abroad that were directly religious, that had a religious purpose. But they even gestured towards the fact that in a lot of contexts, it may be that the religious community in the local or regional setting may be the only player in town that can accomplish this otherwise foreign policy goal that the president has determined is the appropriate goal. And so, right after 9/11, under the Bush administration, there were programs that would fund mosque infrastructure for communications, for instance, that were literally given over to religious programming. But it was because they were pro-democracy or pro-US side partners. And there wasn't a lot that could be done in that regard if you thought that was a problem. short of a political solution of elections, right, as a political check on that. So I think, just to sort of give you the 12-second takeaway, I think we kind of have a general solution to that problem. And the government's playing by it, and generally the religious communities are playing by it. Most of the religious communities end up creating a separate 501c3 charitable organization that then is the entity that engages with the government. So it's Catholic Charities that does this, not the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. They create a separate legal entity that is and that can follow more nimbly some of the rules that are laid out. But I think the other thing I'll say about this conversation so far is that for me it raises the issue that across the board, both the governments and the religious communities, we're doing a really poor job at the level of moral culture in conveying why this is so crucial. When panelists, at the Berkeley Center, we have a lot of panelists. Some of you have even been there for some of our panels. Katrina has been to a number of ours on them. People are really good at articulating what it is, but when you talk to the average taxpayer, nobody knows what PRM is. Nobody could even imagine what the function of that is and what the requirements of having an organization of the government that provides that kind of service requires. And it's just the typical, well, we pay too much in taxes and there's all these fat, lazy bureaucrats sitting up there in Washington doing these things and sucking my money away. And why aren't we helping our own people? And I think that there's a number of connections that can be made more clearly in a bipartisan way. In fact, every time these things are threatened to be cut, you start to hear the bipartisanship, right? It was Republican senators and congresspersons who were also coming out saying, you can't gut, and military leaders, you can't gut the State Department apparatus in the way that President Trump had proposed, because it will have all of these detrimental effects and end up costing us more blood and treasure down the road, and it will be detrimental. And that raises the question for me, is that primarily a government responsibility, or is that a failure in some ways of all of the kinds of civil society and cultural institutions, and what I would call the moral institutions, the religious communities, the civil agency, the civil institutions that have that help form the democratic will, that help form the way that we engage in political matters, to put pressure on the way legislators work. Is that a failure of those communities to kind of continually put the pressure on in the right way, patiently playing the long game, insisting that, and universities have a role in this too, I would argue, insisting that the moral ends of where do we spend our tax dollars need to include the kinds of things like the aspirations of responsibility to protect, the aspirations of the UN Declaration of Human Rights that says that humans have, without regard to creed or nationality, to push back primarily against the kind of over-fetishization which we have in America, and I succumb to this too. I'm a product of rural Indiana, after all. It's deeply rooted in me, of the kind of nation-state order that trumps all, of the kind of security, and for very good reasons. I mean, we've been attacked in terrible ways, and yet there are deeply suffering people. And we, in some ways, have lost the capacity to perceive that suffering. Some of this is products of late modern capitalism and the fact that we just have information overload, and you see this Syrian boy washed up on shore, and it becomes an image that's just like anything else. Is that even a movie? Is that real? And then you just become immune to these sorts of examples of the terrible plight that people have. And we also tend to ascribe, the last thing I'll say, in fact, I was talking about this, we were talking about economic inequality this morning in the seminar I was teaching at law school. It's been a long day. And the way that people ascribe moral failure to individuals that are suffering. It's like, why? Well, what are they coming for? They want to take, You know, I mean, we hear this especially with Mexican immigration. They want to take our services. They want to take these things away from us, as opposed to, you know, nobody decides to get up one morning in Syria and say, let's just hop on a boat across the Mediterranean and go to Europe because it seems better. No, they're dying. They are under existential threat, and this is the only possible solution that is presented themselves. And we need to understand that as the baseline, I think, as a moral matter, to then imagine how we respond with these government programs and institutions. So in some ways, I think we have all of the pieces in place. We are missing, to some extent, the larger cultural conversation that can help fill in the motivations of a wider group of people to help support these things.
Thank you, Michael. I had another question, but I'd rather, that was thought-provoking enough. I'd like to hear the thoughts of the panel about what Michael just said. Is there something you would add or respond to about that in terms of moral failure and the nature of the work you do, or what keeps you involved, or how you try to, well, don't let me put words in your mouth, but how you try to get your people to engage in this at a different level so that they don't get the kind of charitable malaise.
And just to be clear, I wasn't saying these institutions are morally failing. It's that the moral culture itself has failed to provide the space for these moral stories to be heard.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about a lot of that moral failure, if you want to call it that, exists because it's so much information overload, and it's such a big picture, and we get overwhelmed with a lot of stuff. We go, I don't know what to do about that. And so we just kind of fall back on a neutral or a passive position. But when we are encouraged or forced by circumstance to engage on in an interpersonal level, that's when our minds change. And I think because we're very isolated as a community, we're on our devices a lot, we're in our homes a lot, we don't live in extended families, and so part of that isolation is also contributing to that lack of conversation about why shouldn't we be empathetic? Why don't we get involved in somebody else's pain when it's not our own pain? And so to me, one of the true solutions about that is we have to get out. And this forum is a good example of people who are interested. Get out of our own isolation and interact with people who are very different from us, because that creates the empathetic circumstance that we can start to have that conversation. Otherwise, we'll never have it.
Yeah, I would say that in the last couple of years, the refugee resettlement agencies have, every single one of them, there are over 300 of them across the country, been literally overwhelmed with offers of assistance. And so I would argue that these were people who were not so overwhelmed they could not act, but in fact were offering all kinds of goods, money, services, time, whatever they had, to the point where the resettlement agencies could barely keep up with what was coming in. I think we have it. Picture of it.
So Barbara, let me ask you to address that question. Why aren't my tax dollars enough?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what. Congress, when they established the Refugee Act, purposely established it as a public-private partnership. And I'm proud to say that there's no way the money that we attach to our cooperative agreements comes even close to paying for what we ask our recipients to do and to provide for refugees, because we expect that the public at many levels is going to contribute to the resettlement of refugees. So it's written into the law, if you will, that this is a public-private partnership, and we work hard to make sure that there are opportunities to participate.
It strikes me, though, that these these nine agencies, terrible with numbers, even small ones. These 9 agencies, however, are different than simply a public-private partnership, in the sense that you need something more than individual donations.
Oh yeah.
For a program of this scope, in order to predictably provide aid in relationship to, say, that other government agency that says these 15 people can come in now, or then they, like I know in Charlottesville, it's 270 this year. Is that right? 250 this year are coming to Charlottesville. You need a level of organization, I would think, that only organized religion or organized other groups But we're here to talk about religion, so I'll say organized religions, and particularly highly organized religions can deliver.
So we fully fund the headquarters of these 9 agencies to carry out the functions that we expect of them.
So salaries.
That's just, yeah, operations, salaries, you know, all kinds of technology, all kinds of things that happen.
Right, you buy the computers and the paper
Yep.
and the, pay the salaries.
Yep. And then we
Can't get a
provide-
computer, right? So.
Yeah, I know. And then we provide what's our per capita amount for every refugee that they resettle, that it goes straight through the national headquarters to the local level. And part of it, almost half of it now, is to be used for staffing at the local level, and a little more than half of it is to be used to provide the usually rent, deposit, goods that refugees need in their first month. Some of the agencies can spread that to 2-3 months, but then there are other federal organizations and state and local programs that kick in that refugees are eligible for that help to support them.
So do you ever pick up the phone and call Sharon and say, I need X?
Well, I got to tell you, the first time I saw this, what I have loved most about working with the Mormon Church lately and other organizations, I mean, it's been corporations like Airbnb and TripAdvisor, all kinds of people have come out of the woodwork to help on a big level, is inviting people from those organizations to meetings with the national resettlement agencies and letting them show a video like that and offer what they have to offer, and watching jaws drop and signing up. Like, how can I get something, you know? It's been really an amazing couple of years in that regard. So we try to broker relationships between organizations that can help at the national level, as well as individuals who call up and say, I have a rice cooker.
And I want to begin to turn this over to you, to your questions, but pause for a moment on that word relationship. I think that's one thing money can't buy. I think, and I get this from reading Michael's work, where he talks about the importance of knowing one another in a culture. This bowling alone phenomenon, we do more than bowl alone now. But these kinds of activities, those meetings you're holding, or I assume what's going on in Charlottesville, bring people together that otherwise would have no sense of a common cause, and it is that sense of common cause out of which democracy functions, and institutions like this. So, is there anything we haven't talked about together here that you'd like to say before we turn it over to the audience? Is there something that's gone unsaid, Anwar?
Well, real quick, I just wanted to say, the moral voice is something that we sometimes are scared to talk about.
Talk in your mic, if you will.
Sorry, the moral voice is something that we are sometimes scared to talk about as people of faith. The fact that 6 of the 9 voluntary agencies are faith-based, and people don't know that, I think that's partially because people are scared about talking about it. People are confused, they don't know what the establishment clause means. I didn't know until I moved to DC. Government cannot favor one religion over others. That doesn't mean that faith-based organizations can't work within the same set of rules. We are shy sometimes to talk about morals, to talk about ethics and others. So I feel that it is something that we need to talk more about, and the success of different faiths coming. I mean, HIAS, it's a Jewish organization. 52% of their refugees are Muslims. We talk to them, we've done advocacy work with Islamic Relief with them, they want us to become a VOLAG and all of that. That's on a different level. And once you start doing that and get Muslims and Jews working together on things here in America, you can imagine what can be done. So I do believe that we don't talk about the moral stuff enough. The one other thing that I'm concerned about, Barbara, is with my friends in the 9 VOLAGs is, because the number of refugees has gone down, they're firing excellent staff all across the country because they're not getting the money. If the refugees don't come, if our president doesn't let the refugees in, if you can't give them their 50% for their capital cost. You can't give them that other money. So we have all these people who have amazing language skills, amazing people skills, who are now out of work. That's my concern right now. So I'm not speaking about my organization, I'm talking about others. We are losing really capable people. And at a time when the world is becoming more scary, one of the most lovely projects that I think the youth government does is what PRM is doing. And I'm saying that my main concern right now is we are losing those staff. We are going down from 110 to maybe 50. We'll see if we can even do 50 this year. And then next year we'll see what's happening after that. And I'm worried about the moral high ground of us and our government. Because every time people say, well, these refugees are coming here. Well, if you look at the countries, Iraq, we were involved in a war with that one. Afghanistan, we were involved in a war with that one. Syria, we're trying to help out. Pakistan, we have military action there. Somalia, we have military action there. The next one on this list is Iran. Hopefully we won't have any military action there. This is the stuff going on. We don't understand that we are involved in different crises. This is, in my opinion, part of our morality, that we can say, like it says in the Bible, how am I going to help the stranger? This is part of our stuff. When we say that we're helping these people, can't just help them by bombing them. You have to help them by rebuilding the schools and the hospitals, but also sometimes they can't go back home. There's not one Syrian I met that wanted to come to America. They wanted to go home. One of the women said that her daughter cried every night because she still remembers her sister being raped in the room next door and the screaming from that. Please remember that child and other children. So much torture, so much rape that we heard over there in the refugee camps, and they didn't tell us directly. There's a reason why a father and mother sent their 6 young girls between 10 and 16 from Syria to Lebanon to stay in a cow stable in Lebanon. These are people who have gone through horrific trauma. Nobody comes here to this country without 2 years of extreme vetting. We already have extreme vetting. So please, let's not be the extremists by pushing these people away.
Sharon, I think you haven't spoken for a while. Is there something you wanted to say?
I was just thinking as we had this discussion, people are being laid off because the number have dropped. And I don't know, you can probably say, how long do people get assistance from the agency? Is it a 6-month period of time?
It depends on what kind of agreements the local resettlement agency has with the funding source. But most agencies have funding that they can help refugees for up to several years. Not paying the rent, but helping them find a job.
So there's a certain amount of time where they get assistance and then they age off of that assistance in different kinds of ways. And to have somebody like Anwar just described who has had that kind of trauma in their life, you don't get over that in the 6 months that you're, with your time. And to paraphrase a leader of our church, Gordon B. Hinckley, he said, they need a friend, they need meaningful work, and they need the freedom to practice their faith in an open kind of way. And those kinds of things don't get settled in the first 6 months. And I think that is the gap that still needs to be addressed. And as the numbers go down about the people we are accepting, we ought to then, as a society, start looking at how do we make the people who are already here more successful? Because they don't come radicalized, but when they don't get friends, when they don't get meaningful work, and when they can't practice their religion without fear, they become radicalized. We create that in our society, I think, because we don't provide those kinds of things. And so you talked about the 2 paths, you went that one path, but there are other people who are tempted by that other path because they are missing those basic things. Not because they came that way, but because of their experiences in this country. So my plea would be to the society, as we, even if we're forced to lower the numbers, let's at least take care of the people that are here, and don't think, well, we're not receiving so many people, so now it's over, we don't have to do as much. There's so much work to be done.
Thank you. Thank you. Now the time is yours. Do you have questions for this distinct? Dick, why don't you start us off?
Thank you for your presentation.
Do we have a microphone? I think
I want to just build off of what you're talking about right now. You said that the numbers are coming down in the U.S. I'm curious, what is being done about providing shelter in place? That we can send military over, we can, do the things that we've seen, but we have an opportunity to provide shelter in place that hopefully could create the kind of opportunities or the kind of security, the kind of employment and ability to practice their own religions where they live. And it seems to me that at some point that's got to be the solution. And I know that it's a very difficult one because we're talking about very volatile neighborhoods, but I would be curious to understand what each of you feel is the timeline that might take to actually implement, and if that's a realistic implementation in itself. Thank you.
Okay, I can start, I suppose, but I don't have any numbers with me on this topic, but the U.S. government is a huge funder of assistance overseas and funds UNRWA and UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, millions and millions and millions of dollars every year, and for the purpose of providing shelter through other organizations and other international organizations and non-governmental organizations all over the world. Because the second, the first and the second durable solutions have to do with sending people back home. Most people end up going back home. Really, it can take years, but ERM is one organization that funds and supervises opportunities for people to go back home by providing them with subsistence materials and seeds and food and protection, making sure that people are protected and can return home and start life over again. So we do a lot of that as a country. We probably don't talk about it as much as would be helpful. And then in terms of local integration, or when refugees are in a safe second country or country of asylum, again, the U.S. spends a lot of money providing housing, medical care, in some cases education, working with local partners, local governments. We're certainly funding a lot of support in the Middle East right now. In Jordan, a lot of money is being spent to support refugees in particular, internally displaced persons in other situations who need protection and need the basic necessities of life. And we do that a lot through, as I said, NGOs and international organizations as well.
To build on what Barbara said, I said earlier, only 1% of refugees are resettled. So you've got 99% that are either stuck as displaced people in their own country or then in the second country that's nearby. Data shows that people will return home if there are medical facilities and if they can get their kids in school. And so that's one of the great priorities. As soon as shelter is in place, if you can get that generation back into some kind of meaningful education, people will stay because they can see that that's the chance for their kids. And so a lot of resource goes into that. And every one of us at this table, I think, has had experiences in those. I would just give an experience of my own. It isn't the most demonstrative, but I was recently in Kurdish Iraq, and we were touring through places that ISIS had been pushed out of. And because of their creed or whatever it is, they have purposely made everything uninhabitable. So they have cut every copper wire, they have smashed every plumbing facility, they have made it as difficult as possible for people to come back. And so the need in a case like ISIS is just so overwhelming for people to be able to come back and repatriate those places. And there's some very courageous mayors and governors who are saying, we are going to make this habitable again. And they're going out and coordinating with other agencies and working on the medical and the educational so that people can come back.
So what do you do in Kurdish Iraq, in those cities that have been leveled, like Sherman going through the south, I suppose, destroying the entire environment? What do you do with LDS Charities? What do you move in with?
LDS Charities did a partnership with the governor of Kirkuk. He's an Iraqi who lived in the United States for a long time. He's come back. And he said, I've got 30 schools that I think if we rehabilitate, people that are fleeing Mosul can come back in. So we started to provide actual physical schools, and then this is a dumb example, but they needed desks. People were sitting in resin chairs, and they were running 3 shifts in the school. And so we said, all right, we'll provide the desks, but we're not going to buy them. Let's have the people that live here make them. Well, people that had fled out of Mosul, these are professional people. These are accountants and attorneys and medical people, and they're not welders. But we took them into this big warehouse, and we rotated these shifts so that people could learn a skill that they might not be able to do accounting anymore, but they are going to need welders. And so we turned it into some vocational training. Nobody thinks that that's the greatest thing. I was a doctor and now I've become a welder of school desks. But they were so proud to have that investment in their kids' future at the school. And so that's a little example, but it comes back down to that meaningful work that it provides to all.
My only concern is that the fact is that U.S. government is the most generous, but we still don't have enough money often when UN does appeals. Whether it be UNRWA or other agencies, we fall a bit short. Now, yes, we are, Barbara, the most generous, but we're also the richest. If you look at percentage, my old country of UK signed on to a percentage, which we haven't in the US. So in terms of dollar amounts, we are the most generous. In terms of percentage of income, as you know, there are others that do more in Europe. And again, we're talking a couple of percent. So I would say again that we should be proud of what we've done and our government's done, but unfortunately as an international community we haven't done enough. So some governments aren't spending the percentage or the amount of it. Nobody's spending the amount, others aren't even spending the percentage that we're doing. So I'm encouraging the US government to spend like the British government and others, that percentage on international development. I am an immigrant to America from England. I am a child of refugees who fled ethnic cleansing from India to Pakistan, who then were in refugee camps, my father, in Sindh, in Karachi, worked his way through medical school to become a doctor, went to Saudi, worked there for a few years, then brought his younger brother from Pakistan to become a pharmacist over there. Then moved to England and wanted his kids to become actually doctors. My mother's mad, I'm the only Dr. Khan that's not a doctor. My sister Rithia was a dentist, and she still hasn't forgiven me. I'm the bum of the family, I have a BSc honors. So, and my mother has a master's, she was the first woman in her class. She has a master's in Arabic and Islamic studies, and my father was a doctor. Not bad for refugees. These are not people who want to come and just get a handout. If you want to get a handout, you sit in the camp over there. You won't try to risk your life to come over here. And our most important work, I believe, and again, it's what you said, it's about rehabilitating those schools. It's about those clinics. It's about giving them a chance. Afghanistan is an excellent example. Right now, Pakistan's trying to get the Afghan refugees to go back. Pakistan's saying, I can't cope. I've got these millions of refugees for years. I need them to go back. They don't want to go back because they're saying they don't have the school, they don't have the healthcare that they have in Pakistan, but they're living illegally in Pakistan. They'd rather live illegally as fear of deportation and actually go back. So everybody, normally they want to go back. But again, it's as an international community, it's not fair to just look at one government. We're not doing enough.
Is there another question? Yes.
Hi, Thank you. My name is Mohammed Sekari. I was born and raised in Syria. I wanted to take the question of the amount of information and the information overload. In the early 1980s, there was a massacre committed in about the fourth largest city of Syria, Hama. About 40,000 people were killed. And the people thought that nothing happened. They had no support from outside because nobody knew about it. With the recent uprising, there were people that lost their life uploading YouTube videos on the internet, people who got jailed because they interviewed with the CNN, and you know the rest of the story. So it's not really a matter of information, it's an issue of perhaps indifference, perhaps major US policy, and we know what happened in Iraq. It's something else, it's not information. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that here's a real-time example. Watching the news with Hurricane Irma working its way through, it was as if it only was a real hurricane when it hit the Keys of Florida and then was on its way to Tampa, right? Even though it had wreaked havoc and deep destruction. And now with, is it Maria? Right? It hit the entire territory of Puerto Rico, millions of US citizens, right? It's as if it's not even happened. And I mean, what is going on there, right? I mean, this is actually a US territory. These are US citizens. They vote in the election, right? I think one of the just dark underbellies that exposes is the inherent kind of tribalism that is operative in the way that we take that information, in the way that we decide even what we're going to pay attention to. You know, what's more important than the Facebook video of the cat? Is it, well, oh my God, this hurricane hit Tampa, right? But if it hits Puerto Rico, or if it hits the British Virgin Islands or San Martin or something, it's less. And there's something deeply troubling for a religious ethicist to look at that and to think what might be going on there, what might be the explanation that's going on. And that there's a tension that runs counter even to the deep resources that are present in, I mean, we can recite all the resources in the religions, in the major religions. I'm not Catholic, actually. I'm at a Catholic university, so I've become very aware of what Pope Francis has said about these things. And the tradition of Catholic social thought, I think, is deeply contrary in many ways to the kinds of cultural drivers that would make it that we would not perceive that suffering, right? The religious traditions, the religious communities, the religious institutions, if anything, raise awareness of other suffering. But it's more than just awareness of other suffering, it's what do we do about it? And right, these are people that do something about it based on that. The gap, I think, is well, how do we get more people, right? And is that from my perspective, is that a government problem? Not as much as it's a religious community problem.
I can't help but think of the popularity in my own field of talking about people who are spiritual but not religious. And that is a direct conflict, I mean, that's a direct comment on the lack of organization to that religious sentiment, right? And so part of American individuality and independence now has reached religion to an extent that, and we've always been uncomfortable with constellations of religious power in this country, but nonetheless, today, if you're a Muslim, you know where you can give your money. And if you're a Mormon, you know where to give your money if you want to help. But I'm wondering how many Americans out there anymore, when they see those films, they tune them out because they don't know what to do. Sure, they can find the IRC and give them a toaster oven, or they can, give them $100. But in the face of the demolition of Puerto Rico, where does that sentiment go? And I suppose that's one of the things I wanted to bring out in this conversation was the importance of not just voluntary societies, but religious voluntary societies that carry some kind of ethic beyond individualism. And so I appreciate you raising that point about theology and ethics, and Anwar raising the point of he feels that we are too shy of mentioning religious values in our society, but why would we not be after 50 years of arguing whether you can use religious reasoning in the public square? Right? So,
would you let me respond just very quickly to this example from Syria? In March of 2011, I happened to be in Syria, and the protests were starting around Damascus, but they hadn't been violent. And so I left the capital and went into Hama, actually. I was thinking about that when you were talking about that. And then I left and came back to the United States, and then the whole thing exploded. And one of the people that I had met in Syria that was a contact in the United States was somebody from the Syrian American Medical Society. And because of the crisis in Syria, this group of Syrian American doctors and other medical professionals, they have really risen to the occasion. And you ought to be proud of your countrymen, because what they are doing in Syria itself, they are one of the few organizations that has the capacity to actually help people on both sides of the conflict there and in the community around. They have done something. They weren't on the map before the Syrian crisis, but they have risen up to do something. And because of who they are, they're practicing doctors and nurses in their communities in the United States. They tell that story. And so if it doesn't get covered in the news, they're at least telling it at the grassroots level by their own actions. And I wish that I knew of more examples of that, but you should be proud of Syrian American Medical Society, because they're in a small way addressing that little crisis that you talked
And I have met with them twice in great numbers in our office to talk about the work that they are doing, both overseas, but especially with refugee communities here in the U.S.
Muhammad was on board.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm choir.
I didn't know that.
I remember when Homa happened. I remember when, I think it was 82, it was in the early 80s. And the Syrian Air Force came and massacred everyone in that town. We didn't hear about it much. Then I was very appalled to find out in the 90s when some of my friends went to learn Arabic in Syria. They came back and they told me, well, all those people that were killed were terrorists. And Assad was absolutely right. I said, you went there to learn Arabic and you came back brainwashed. You lost your humanity when you thought it's okay to kill tens of thousands of women and kids in that town. You don't need to know that kind of Arabic. We tend to donate money to people who look like us. So when there is a crisis in Eastern Europe, let's say Bosnia, we're more generous than often when it's in Africa. We tend to give to kids that look like our kids. So if we are of olive skin, we have that affinity. If we're white, we have that affinity. Look how much money was raised for European crisis compared to Africa. And if you look at Bosnia, we were more generous to Bosnia. We were very generous to Kosovo, and we acted very quick to Kosovo, where the level of religion was very low, and many of them were Marxist. Where Islam was a bit higher in Bosnia, we took longer to help. We didn't do the same kind of help ever in Chechnya. So I would say it's to do with the color of your skin, it's to do with which continent you live in, and it's also to do with your religion. Sam's only raises $30 million a year. It's not that much compared to how much is needed over there. They do a good work, but it's when Save the Children, it's when IRC, it's when all of Plan International and all these big players start raising large amounts of money. So I'm very happy with what our colleagues in Sam's and others are doing, but I'm saying that I believe that the color of the skin, the religion of the person, has an effect. Now Haiti was an exception. Haiti, we were very generous. I was living in Haiti. We were very generous. But they were closer to us. They weren't in Africa, but they were from African origin. But again, if you look normally, if the UN is trying to raise money for the Middle East and for Africa, it's not as successful as for other places. And again, this is because we tend to give to people that look like us, maybe the same religion. And people are afraid, I believe, if they help Syria and they're helping Muslims over there. So I believe that there is some issues that is to do with our prejudices as well. And I think if more Americans were like Sharon and they went over there and they saw, they wouldn't be so scared. But I feel that there is a fear that people have. And if you're watching TV all the time, telling you to be afraid, to be afraid, to be afraid of the other, that's also part of the reason. So I'm very disappointed that I believe we could do a lot more in America than we're doing for Syria. But my argument is it's not just for Syria. We tend to give to others. And remember, even when there's crisis here in America, we don't always raise the money that we need to help our fellow Americans too. So I'm not saying it's racism, I'm just saying we tend to have an affinity for kids that look like our kids. And when they bleed, we donate more money than when they cry. And when they cry, we donate more money than when they smile.
There's no question that one of the paradoxes about religion, it is both a means of creating racist philosophies and overcoming them. And one of the wonderful possibilities for what you're doing is by engaging with one another and being in a relationship, you overcome religion's tendency towards racism too. So I hear that on this panel as well. We probably have time for 2 more questions. Let me go here. Well, yes, go here in the back. Yes.
Actually, on his thing. Oh, thank you. On his thing with the racism thing for donations. So when we donated money to Somalia, it went to the horrible people who took it and ran that country. It did not go to the people that it was supposed to go to. So we as Americans look at that and we don't want to donate to support terrorism and to have horrible people take our money and use that very food to feed the people that are going to kill those that we use our money to save. And so I think that that is a reason, and in these European countries, the networks to help people are much greater than in Africa. When you go to Ethiopia with these deserts where people are dying of starvation, you know, how can you bring them stuff when there's no network to bring?
So let's just address that larger question of how do you know whom to trust with your charity?
Right,
and who can bet?
When the Soviet Union fell apart, Germany
there are many examples.
Right, Germany sent tons of food on trains that rotted on those trains because the former Soviet Union had no network.
So let's let Barbara. Can you talk about that a little bit? How do you vet?
Yeah, foreign assistance isn't my area, but we do have means that every contract, every grant that we award has to be vetted against organizations that are, you know, in any way related to terrorism or have to have the capacity to deliver the goods, so to speak. You know, they have to be organizationally adept and prove that they can handle the U.S. dollars.
So even recently with the hurricanes, the New York Times ran an article, how to know when you're being scammed when someone is raising money for hurricane victims. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to educate ourselves and find institutions we trust that can deliver those goods. Ideally, those who have religious affiliations find that within their religious institutions. But those who don't have those institutions will have to do a different kind of vetting. But there are independent organizations that analyze philanthropic institutions and rate them. So there are ways you can find out. I don't think that needs to stop us from giving and giving to people far away. Is there another question? Yes, sorry.
Mike's far, so I'll just
talk about we can get it to you. My cousin Brian Johnson, who's a man on the spot, is very good at this.
Thank you. So for many people, particularly younger people like myself coming out of school and moving in our careers, a lot of our interaction with immigration and refugees and all of these things is through media, and particularly social media. As we all know, social media has a very short attention span and it can distort things and can have interesting selective bias. But how has social media, how has it been helpful or how has it been hurtful, harmful to your efforts, and in what ways?
And this will have to be our last question because we're...
Social media really for us has been amazing. It's allowed us to connect with people all across America and all across the world. It's allowed us to be able very cheaply to communicate. You can get the videos of that person in Mogadishu and you can get it over here in Charlottesville very easily. We've been able to break down some social barriers, connect people who are like-minded across, but it also works the other way around. So people who are like-minded of hate may be using social media, but we found ourselves that it's a wonderful tool to raise awareness, and when you raise awareness and you raise activity, then you hope later on you'll be raising more resources. So it's a cycle. You show people the money's being spent properly. First you show there's a problem, then you show the money's being spent properly, then people give you more money, and then the cycle goes round and round. So we are now raising more than 50% of our money online. We don't raise our money, so we raised last year in America about 63 million cash from individuals in America. 37 million was online. This is not institutional money from governments, this is from individuals. And we're finding our online is constantly going up and up. And we find that we use social media to constantly mobilize people to become active in one way or the other. So if we're doing a pack out and we need 200 volunteers, it's just a simple thing, send it on social media, and at any time we can get 200 people like that in a weekend in DC. We couldn't do that.
Did you want to comment on that one?
I will, but if Sharon wants to.
I was just going to say, there's two kinds of people who use social media. There are the consumers that just sit there and absorb things, and there are the people who are out doing something and then they're posting about that. And for the people who post, at night when I go to sleep and I want to end on a good note after I've been in a lot of bad places, I'll scroll up through that I Was a Stranger, and I think there's 96,000 posts of individual things that individual women have done. And to me, that kind of community, as I scroll through that, it just blows open what the traditional media is ever able to do. That's a dumb comment to end on, but it's my,
Oh, I got a dumber one.
my final comment.
I got a dumber one. You know, the government isn't real famous for being real tech savvy, and so we do some social media, and when at some point they asked all of us on staff to put all of those little icons for all the different social media things on our signature block for every email, totally crashed the system. So we had to take them all off. We do social media, but not very much.
But I think it raises, for all of the good it does, it also raises a number of issues about coordination and about sustainability of movements. I think one of, the Arab Spring, for instance, the so-called Arab Spring is a really great example of this, right? The question just is, okay, you can get a bunch of people marching in, and this can really push pressure in various ways. It can raise money, but then what do you do on the 11th day and the 12th day, and I think in the American context right now, I think that you see the fissures in Black Lives Matter and the different movements that are protesting different levels of police oppression and these sorts of things. And it becomes difficult to coordinate when there's lots of messages going out. But the alternative of having one unified movement that that isn't how these things work, right? Read Madison Federalist 10, and right, factions is the way we are. And so in some ways, social media is a great catalyst for those groups coming together in sort of dynamic, momentary, quick time horizon sort of things. But to think that it's going to be the elixir that fixes all and creates these grand movements, I think is just sort of overselling human nature. But if you can raise that amount of money, God bless. It's doing something right.
So thank you for those comments and for the reminder that though we can raise money on the web and tax dollars do some good, it doesn't come down to money, it comes down to human-to-human contact. Lives are saved by other lives. And so I hope you take that and many other good things that were said tonight. And I thank you for coming. And I hope you will come back tomorrow night in the Rotunda at 6 o'clock to hear the second session of our conversation. But for now, let us thank these people for all their good thoughts and good acts.